policy challenges, first of all. I'm going to set a little bit of history and give you a little bit of data, because what I wanted to do with this next section was to see what the policy challenges have been, but also what their impact has been. So I've described the policy stack challenge. I've written about this, but essentially it's read that we have many funder policies, we have different compliance requirement. Some of those policies are funded or not. And then we have different publisher policies, some publishers have different policies depending on who's funded the researcher. Then we have the REF policy, which differs substantially from other UK policies, and it applies to all UK academics. And then we have the issue that publisher policies are not always in line with funding or research council policies. And basically for academics, it's difficult to know what to do to comply with both funder and REF policies. That's where we are right now. So we've got the whole it's complicated thing. You're a researcher, you've had your idea, you've applied for your research grant, that's been peer reviewed. You've hired your staff, you've done the research, you've crunched the data, you've written your findings up. And then those have been peer reviewed. And then all in aid of working out whether your work is compliant with your funder or eligible for the REF, at which it will be peer reviewed again, you have this wonderful diagram and your decision tree, and thank you, Arthur, for that. So that's from the researcher perspective, and it is really complicated. I think it's a particular UK challenge. We have multiple funder and publisher policies which create a complex policy stack. Knowing what is best or right can be difficult to figure out. Funders are introducing progressive open policies, whereas some significant publishers are setting embargo requirements that are either at or below the minimum required by funders, with the consequence that opting and paying for gold or hybrid open access may be the only means of compliance. And I think this is a particular issue in the UK. We've seen some upward trends since all of these policies have been introduced. We continue to see a growth in publication volume. We continue to see a growth in the charges that we pay, both for subscriptions and also for open access charges. We have the complexity that I have just described. We also have the complexity of accountability. Any of you who are on the RCUK side of the repository work and such like, you will know only too painfully how much accounting, as it were, you have to do to make sure that you're spending the money correctly, that we can fill in all the reports for RCUK, and of course we've got the REF coming up, which I know you're talking about today. But we've also got a trend in disparity, and particularly if we think of the Global South, and access to content and access to venues of publication. So all of those trends are upwards. But how effective have these policies been? So, bit of Imperial data. We have about £500 million worth of research income at Imperial, which is covered by open access policies. And our researchers publish between 10 and 12,000 articles a year. Now what I did was I went back to 2007, which is around the time that the first Welcome policy came out. And I had a look at our Faculty of Medicine because they would have been the major recipients of of Welcome funding. Not very much going into the repository at that time. We had only 2.56% of those 3,903 articles published in that year went anywhere near the repository. But only 19% were actually not in any form of open access source. So the problem that we were trying to crack at that point was that 19%. So if we jump forward to 2013, we're still not seeing huge engagement with the repository at this stage. It's gone up to 9.3%. And the stuff that's not anywhere open access has gone down to 16%. So we've seen a small rise in repository engagement and a small decrease in stuff that is closed access only. Then if I look at that same thing, so if we look at 2012, all faculties, what's our engagement with the repository? And of course 2012-13 is when we see Finch impacting. So in 2012, at Imperial, we have only 9.69% engagement with the repository. Now, the REF comes along, the REF policy comes along, and you will all know this story very well, the business of having to upscale your repository activity, and in doing so, putting your researcher at the centre of any workflow in order to gain their attention. At Imperial, that we knew that we needed to upscale to accept at 900% more than we were accepting in 2012. So quite a lot of work has gone on with Ruth Harrison and her team at Imperial College to make that a reality without me having to apply for 900% more staff. Lots and lots of information available to our researchers. So now let's look at the impact of the policy. First of all, let's look at the Faculty of Medicine. So between that 2013 date, after which we'd seen a number of years of the welcome policy, and then 2018 when you overlay the REF policy onto that. So there's our 2013 date. That's the impact of the REF, just in repository engagement alone with the Faculty of Medicine. So the welcome policy had made a small increase and a small difference. The REF policy has made a very significant difference. And the other thing is that we're now down to only 4%, which is not found in any open access source at all for the Faculty of Medicine. We are seeing a growth in publishing pure gold open access in pure open access journals. I think this is data from 2014 to 2018. It shows PLOS One as the top of the first 10 journals. I think that's now been replaced by scientific reports if we just look at the 2018 data. But there's a lot of pure open access publishing happening. Now, UK policies have so far been progressive. They've set minimum criteria, and the REF will reward those that go beyond those criteria. And I think we've all seen a considerable innovation in monographs publishing and in the establishment of UK university-led monographs presses. And then we've also seen that the academics are covered by multiple funders. That drives progression, because even if they're going for the minimum compliance, it will often end up exceeding criteria for the REF. So if they're funded by a research funder and want to be eligible for the REF, whichever of those is the most progressive policy is the one that they will go for. So now, where are we? We are around 80%, 88% open access, but for that it comes with a big price tag. We pay, or we have allocated to us over £2.2 million. Some of that is an Imperial Fund. We have a £500,000 Imperial Fund for open access, and then the rest comes from the various funders. But that's on top of an £8.5 million content budget. And we also have a nice healthy number of deposits that now have a date of acceptance, and I think this figure may even have gone up, because I know there's been a big push recently to work on those dates of acceptance. So Rachel's just talked about the policy future and Plan S. Everything changes under Plan S for us. Plan S is challenging price and pace. It's challenging copyright. It's challenging open access for some disciplines who have very minimal engagement with open access. We've heard of a lot of discussions about open access for monographs, but we'd have a lot of our colleagues in the humanities who simply, they don't necessarily get research funding and they've not necessarily engaged in open access. Plan S challenges the license. We've had much more restrictive licenses permissible, particularly by the REF, which permits a CC BY NCND license. Plan S is seeking a CC BY license. Plan S is seeking a zero embargo. Now, interestingly, I think if you look at the data, the publishers with zero embargo already tend to be the publishers that are publishing works that don't otherwise receive research funding. I have my own views as to why that might be, but I think it has to do with money. And then, as Rachel's mentioned, we've got the negotiations where, as stated as present, hybrid will not be supported beyond 2024. So take your subscriptions team and your open access team, and you do that. We effectively need to bring the work of these two teams and the expertise of the people in these two teams together to rethink in a new world in our universities. Now, I've tried to conceptualise the challenge of Plan S, not least because there are a number of statements out there that say there is enough money in the system. Now, there's enough food in the world, but we haven't managed to feed everybody yet. So just looking at there is enough money in the system, and I'll take you through this just so that I know, I have posted this widely on Twitter, and I would like to thank JISC for making it look beautiful. My early version didn't. But along the x-axis, you've got, if you think of institutions, on the left-hand side with low-volume research outputs, and on the right-hand side, you move towards the research-intensive institutions. And then you see your costs decreasing, because if much more is available open access, then for the low volume research outputs, they should see things open access, and therefore they shouldn't be having to pay subscriptions anymore. But for research intensive institutions, you see your prices rising very significantly. Multiple times your subscription budget. So as read costs diminish, those with low volume research outputs will want to see those costs reduce. And those with higher volumes of research outputs will see costs increase. And the big challenge is that funds formerly used to pay for read will not necessarily transfer to pay to publish. And if you're lucky, you're in the institution in the middle, where you're in the sweet spot, where actually your subscriptions, if you just flip your subscriptions to paying for open access article processing charges, the costs are about the same. But there are a few institutions that will be in that position. We think they're probably in the band 5 range in the JISC. So what that then means is that the likelihood of your route to making things open access, if nothing else changes, is going to be that you're more likely to be able to publish full open access, and you're more likely to be able to have the money to do it if you're a low volume research institution. When you move to the high volume end and the research intensive end, you're much more likely to need to use your repository. And there is a bit of a beautiful irony at the moment, because just right now, it looks as though there is, in the UK, enough money in the system to make all of this work, and that will change as Plan S and Coalition S bring more funders on board. So at the moment, while we're in that hybrid world, let's call it, where a lot of funders are not yet implementing Plan S policies, there will still be the need for everybody to pay to read. And then there will be the need for some to pay a lot more to publish. So what does that mean? What questions do we have to ask? We've been having a little look at some more numbers. We love numbers at Imperial. So looking, that should say 2012 to 2018, data 2012 to 2018. So we've got 50,000 articles published in 5,375 journals with 762 publishers. But of those 5,372 journals, a third receive only one article in 7 years. Those journals are unlikely to flip. So we need to think about how we're going to reposition our subscriptions portfolio when we have possibly up to a third of our journals which do not or will not contain much Plan S material, particularly if we lose the funding to support open access through hybrid. Again, looking at another bit of data, this is the RCUK spend. It's 3 years worth of spend. The red, so it's 3 years worth of spend for the top 10 publishers. So reading from left to right, you have Elsevier, then Springer Nature, Wiley, PLOS, ACS, OUP, Informer, RSC, IOP, and IEEE. Now, the red is in full open access journals. And from that, you very quickly see that the only two that are making any real move in that direction is PLOS, who are already there, they're fully open access, and Springer Nature, who have made very significant strides towards open access publishing. But all of that blue is hybrid. And all of that, if we're still to be able to use our funds, all of that blue somehow has to move into the red category. So, without an institutional open access policy, which version of an article will meet plan aims in order to be eligible for funding both now and beyond 2024? So for our academics, there is a real concern about choice. Now it may be that for big hybrid deals, they're okay for now. Where we have a big hybrid read and publish deal, and if it's affordable and taken by the institution, then their work can be made open access. But if that deal's not affordable, and if the publisher has no compliant self-archiving policy, then those outputs won't be eligible or compliant. And then if you just have a straight hybrid journal with no deal and no compliant self-archiving policy, again, there's a restriction there. And then if they're just publishing in a pure subscription journal, again with no compliant self-archiving policy. So there are those regions where they can neither publish version of record or self-archive. So that's where our academic concerns are. And then for the librarians and their institutions, there are huge concerns about costs. So, enter the UKSCL, a model open access institutional license. Now, just for record, for those that don't know, the UKSCL, so it's called the UK Scholarly Communications License. We called it a license because originally we planned, the license was the defining feature of it, and we planned to deploy a decaying license, whereby over time the license would decay to a CC BY, but that in the shorter term it would appease publishers and some academics by being a much more restrictive license, but it would have allowed publishers to reap their own investment. That was all deemed much too complex for the community, so we've ended up with a much simpler license, but the UKSCL has since got its own, it's effectively become its own brand. So the community agreed that we would still call it the UKSCL, but it is a model institutional open access policy, and it is based on the Harvard model, which is in operation in over 76 institutions worldwide. If your institution adopts this model policy, it would enable you to retain rights on behalf of your authors, and the default license will be revised so that it is in line with the UKRI policy license when that detail is published. So the UKSCL model institutional open access policy will be fully Plan S compliant. And what effectively it does is allow authors to self-archive and to make their author-accepted manuscript available immediately on publication with reuse rights retained and with a CC license. So you add in the SCL if you have it in your institution, and immediately you have a lever against costs, because you can say to a publisher that comes to your institution and demands a really, really steep price rises, and we've had a few of those coming our way. Thank you very much, but we have another way of ensuring that our authors are compliant. And for your authors, it will enable them to continue to have choice of publication. Now, I don't necessarily believe that the world should or will be a green one. There would be a horrible irony if the research-intensive institutions, if their work was only made available open access through repositories. So we will need to do a lot of negotiating with publishers. But together we can make all of this work. So for funders, we hope that they will have realistic implementation and transition requirements, and that they will negotiate with other funders to increase the volume of outputs covered by the policy, and that they will incentivise and support alternative initiatives and business models. For publishers, we want them to collaborate on realistic and affordable transition plans. For our institutions, we will need to negotiate hard with JISC and other agents where necessary on our publisher negotiations. We will need to support our academics, especially on copyright and rights retention. We can choose to adopt the model policy. And we also, as Rachel indicated, we have an opportunity to rethink and perhaps upgrade our repository infrastructure. And I know nobody wants to do that before the ref is done and dusted. But after that will be very nice, thank you very much. Don't worry, I'm not about to propose that you will run away and add that to your list for 2020. And then for researchers, they need to think, they need to be engaged, and I know it's really, really hard, but engagement on a license to publish rather than a wholesale copyright transfer, and we hope we'll be able to give them some models on that. Continue to act on acceptance. That's been hugely important in getting us where we've got to so far with open access. And also, we hope that they will engage with us on the model open access policy, and I maybe should have said right at the start that the reason we ended up with the Harvard model was when we took the series of options to our academics, the first one of which was the institution will retain your copyright and act on your behalf. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. Give us the Harvard model. So that's what we've been working on. So that's where I think a model institutional open access policy can help support the coalition aims of immediate and full open access. Thank you very much.